Hello, and welcome to All Access Med School Admissions. I'm Christian Essman, and I'm coming to you from the Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. Flavia Nobay from the University of Rochester School of Medicine. The University of Rochester is located in Rochester, New York, which is in the western portion of the state of New York, between Buffalo and Syracuse. Rochester is also positioned along the shores of Lake Ontario, which is one of the 5 Great Lakes, and in the scenic Finger Lakes region of New York. They are a private institution and have been in Rochester for nearly 170 years, since they were first established in 1850. The medical school began taking its first students, though, in 1925. The University of Rochester School of Medicine is dedicated to training future physicians who excel and become leaders in their profession. They meet this goal by fostering the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors of physician, scientist, and humanist by combining cutting-edge, evidence-based medical science with the relationship-centered art that is Rochester's distinctive trademark. The Double Helix curriculum, which fully integrates clinical and basic science training throughout all 4 of the medical school years, is the 21st century expression of the biopsychosocial approach developed at Rochester in the 1950s. The institution is one of the top research centers in the country and the NIH hub for clinical and translational research. The University of Rochester is also the 6th largest employer in the state of New York and the largest employer in Rochester. Rochester accepts applicants from Canada and international students who have or expect to receive an undergraduate degree from the University of Rochester. Since they are a private institution, there's no state residency requirement, and they accept applicants from outside the state of New York. This medical school received a little over 5,300 applications in 2018 and interviewed 636 applicants for a class size of 104. About 50% of their classes are comprised of women, and about 60% of their class comes from the states outside of New York, and last year, 25% of their class self-identified as underrepresented in medicine. For the first time last year, they included data on non-binary students in their class profile. Based on AMCAS matriculant data for 2018, 80% of incoming students had community service or volunteer experiences, 84% had physician shadowing or clinical observation experiences, 84% also had medical or clinical community service or volunteering experiences, 46% had some type of paid medical or clinical employment, and 93% had research or lab experience. The median GPA and MCAT score for students accepted to Rochester in 2018 was 3.79 and a 516 on the MCAT. Rochester's grading system in the first 2 years is pass-fail, and then a tiered system in the 3rd and 4th years with honors, high pass, and pass. Ultimately, they award both MD and MD PhD degrees to their graduates, and they also offer a number of combined degrees such as an MD MPH, an MD Masters in Education, an MD MBA, and an MD Masters in Medical Humanities. Okay, so there's the background sketch for the University of Rochester School of Medicine. Now let's learn more about them with Dr. Flavia Nobay, their Dean for Admissions. Flavia Nobay grew up in Los Angeles, California, and completed her undergraduate years at UC Berkeley, majoring in molecular biology and minoring in classical civilization. Afterwards, she headed to UC San Diego for medical school and graduated in 1995. Following medical school, Dr. Nobay completed her residency training in emergency medicine, and it was during her residency training that she found her 2 lifelong passions: decreasing disparities in healthcare for marginalized populations and medical education. Dr. Nobay went on to UCSF, where she was the emergency medicine clerkship director and a medical school college advisor for the medical school class. In 2006, Dr. Nobay moved to the University of Rochester, where she became the program director of the Emergency Medicine Training Program and concurrently the director of Rochester's 8-year combined baccalaureate and MD degree program. She's now the associate chair of education for the Department of Emergency Medicine, which basically gives her complete oversight over the educational programs and training for faculty and trainees within this department. Now, here comes the admissions piece. In 2017, Dr. Nobay was recruited to become the Associate Dean for Admission for the University of Rochester School of Medicine. Within this role, she's directly responsible for the incoming class of 104 medical students. She also sits on the Curriculum Committee, Medical Student Promotion Committee, and Curricular Redesign Committee for the School of Medicine. Not surprisingly, she has received numerous awards and accolades throughout her career in leadership and education. That's a lot of impressive stuff. I am thrilled and honored to have Dr. Nobay here. So welcome to All Access.
Thank you so much for having me. That's a little humbling to hear about somebody who's done so much stuff. I can't believe it could be me.
Well, you're awfully busy. What is left out of that bio sketch?
Oh, gosh. What's left out of it is the major focus of my life, which is my family and my clinical work, which I love doing. So, I'm really trying to be the triple threat, a family member, an educator, and a clinician. That used to be researcher, educator, and clinician, but I really put family in there because I just can't do everything. And I have a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter currently. I'm married to another emergency medicine physician who does research and works clinically. And trying to balance all that has been, the goal of my life.
Balance all that.
I don't do a great job on a day-to-day basis. I will tell you that and tell you that seriously. But I feel like over the course and spectrum of my life, if I take a more macro view, there is balance associated with it. A wonderful colleague of mine told me that balance is like juggling. And if you realize that the things that you're juggling are tennis balls, that's great. You drop one and they fall. But sometimes there's a glass ball in that juggle. And you have to be aware of what's the glass ball. So you can juggle all you want and drop things. They'll bounce. They'll come back up. You can pick them up. But if you drop that glass ball, it shatters. And it is my everyday goal to figure out what's my glass ball for the day.
Wow.
So that's kind of what I try and do.
Yeah. So you wear a number of hats. What's a typical week like for you? I mean, doesn't sound like you're in the admissions office every day, and you're not in the emergency department every day.
So a typical day or week looks like 60% of my time is in administration, whether it is admissions or emergency medicine. 40% of my professional time is in the emergency department, seeing patients, but also educating trainees, either medical students, residents, or fellows. And then that's 100% of my professional life, but that in and of itself makes up about 50% of my day. Yeah. And the other 50% is really focusing on the three most important people in my life, which is my husband, son, and daughter. Yeah. And making sure that glass ball never shatters. And that's something that is a real threat all the time for women, but also for anybody in medicine.
Yeah. What I was going to ask you, so admissions is kind of a new thing for you. It is. You started that in 2016. What have you found most interesting about the admissions work?
I guess I didn't recognize when I first took the job of the unbelievable impact you can make on an institution and its culture. I really thought of it more as a stewardship or an administrative role, which happened to work out pretty well for my schedule, as my kids needed me a little bit when they were in the evenings, and it allowed me to get out of the shift work. But I have been overwhelmed by the responsibility associated with this role and the talent and breadth and depth of excellence out there, and trying to align values between applicants and classes and institutions has been just profoundly complex. There's no recipe, there's no formula. And anyone that tells you that there's a rubric or a metric that says this is excellence will be proven wrong every single day. And so I really am struck by how difficult it is to align those values when you think you know what the institution needs or what it wants or what it's going for. And you think you know what excellence is, whether it's by grades or GPAs or metrics from the student. That's not what predicts success. And trying to figure that out has been the most interesting thing. And being the steward of that process has been very humbling.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not like when you take a job at admissions, they hand you this book.
I wish
and they
did.
say, here's the manual. Just read it and follow it.
Right.
I think you had mentors in Dr. Hansen, and we had mentor when he left and kind of stuck around and helped us kind of hold our hand through the first couple of years. But yeah, there's not a manual for this. It's kind of amazing how they hand you this responsibility.
And if there were a manual, it would be outdated the day it was published, right?
Right.
It would be like version 65 on day 2 because the environment changes. Like that dynamic interplay between medicine as an environment and who is best suited to serve in that role is really complicated, and it's very moldable, right?
Yeah.
Who we need for tomorrow is not who we needed yesterday or today, possibly. And that's really complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and especially when you talk to alumni and they or current physicians who went to medical school several years ago, and when the advice they give to undergrads, sometimes I'm kind of like,
not
so much now. It's a little different today, kind of thing. So something
and
to
the
be.
thing that I think is the most realistic thing to like put your flag in for me has been what values are consistent across time and space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Whether it's empathy or knowledge acquisition, or self-directed learning or respect. Like these are literally, the things we learn in 3rd grade, right?
Yeah.
This is the sandbox stuff.
Yeah.
And they still hold true in this really advanced setting, which is really interesting.
Right. So since you're an ER physician, do you and you said you're trying to get away from shift work, are you doing mainly days, or do you work at night or overnights and then come into the office?
Well,
some days?
I'm also 50 years old, which I'm not sure I'm comfortable sharing across the time and space well, but I am. And I'll tell you that there's real physiology that changes as you grow up in medicine. So I used to be able to do a night shift and then come in the daytime. But I really now realize that I look like a stroke patient when I do that. And I don't want a stroke alert called on me. So I try to get some sleep now if I have a night. I literally have word finding difficulty. Like I'll be looking at my computer and talk about, the coffee cup. So, so I can't do nights, but I do days and evenings and late nights. And sometimes that works out really well. I don't have a meeting until 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And that will work out well. But the thing that's great about emergency medicine is that your work week is not 5 days. Your work week is 7 days, which gives me 2 extra days compared to most people's mindset.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
So it's a little difficult on our family. And I would advise anyone who has the choice of who they're going to marry or be partnered with in the future to not pick a shift worker if you're doing shift work.
Oh, right.
Because that's like shift work cubed. So I would say that I do days and evenings, and I just have a great office staff, and they're really in tune with my schedule, and they know like I need 4 hours after something or 4 hours before something. And, you just land up being flexible. My body is used to circadian disruption. I don't think it's good for me, but it's used to it. And I've made all sorts of compensations for it.
Yeah. Okay, so something that wasn't included in your bio sketch is, what do you do for fun? So when you have a couple extra days, or like, so what when you're not, taking care of patients in the emergency department, and you're not in the admissions office shaping the next class, what is Flavia out there doing?
Yeah. A couple of things. One, I'm an extrovert. It's plain. If anyone who's met me, I'm a massive extrovert. So I really derive energy from human beings. So anything that allows me to get together with people who share, my joy in life, makes me happy and fills me up. And nothing makes me happier than standing in front of a stove with 10 people in my house screaming like, what's for dinner?
Yeah.
And so that makes me unbelievably happy. So I love cooking, and I particularly love cooking food that is ethnically diverse and weird, and kind of exposing people's palates to different things. And then I will tell you, my greatest hobby right now is being a carpool driver for my children's needs. I am the best carpool driver known to mankind. So I've really perfected that art of taking corners at 60 miles an hour with everyone being safe to get people in on time. And my car looks like Target. I have everything in it at any point in time. So I've really perfected the art of providing as much as possible in a car ride for as many people as possible. So I actually really love going to Starbucks and having a book that I'm interested in reading and meeting a group of colleagues, women's friends, and having a book club or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Something to stimulate my unmedicine mind.
Yeah. To kind of unwind a little bit.
Yeah, right. I've got a dog. I like walking my dog. She's getting old, so I don't feel like I have much time with her. So I've really enjoyed some of that. And if I could do anything, I'm telling you, Christian, I'd be traveling and eating like a food critic or a food taster around the world in ethnically diverse places.
Oh,
so
that sounds like fun.
Yeah, I'd love that.
So you and your husband came from California to Rochester. Did either of you have connections to Western New York? Was that a big adjustment for guys coming from there?
Is Niagara Falls a huge waterfall? Yeah, it was massive. And it was completely, utterly surprising to me. I really thought it was going to be easy. Yeah. I've been in California for 38 years. I grew up in LA. I went to college in the Bay Area. I went to med school in Southern California. I went to residency back in the Bay Area. I'd been there for 38 years, and I met this guy. It's always this guy. And I fell in love with him and married him. And I said on our wedding night, honey, I love you. And I am never moving to Rochester, because he was from Rochester, New York. And unbeknownst.
So what happened next?
Right. What happened was really interesting. My son got sick transiently, and he's totally fine. And it really took my husband and I a step back. We had to take a step back. Neither of us come from a lot of resources. And we recognized that if one wheel fell off our bus, we would go careening down the cliff, because the finances and the effort it took to maintain the lifestyle that we wanted to live, which was not extravagant by any means, was really complicated.
Yeah.
And we realized that, especially being emergency medicine physicians, that, man, every day that you're healthy is a blessing, and every day that things go right is a real gift.
Yeah.
And we just got anxious about having no reserve. Whether it was finances, whether it was emotional reserve, whether it was, commuting, whether it was, just constantly competing, in a city like the Bay Area, where there's an abundance of resources and people who can do it. We just said we need a simpler life, because we're losing sight of our kids. We were working more to pay for things to be done so that we could work more. It became this crazy,
crazy cycle.
Cycle. So we happened to be on vacation in the Western New York region with my in-laws, and they happened to serendipitously or maliciously have somebody from the board of directors from the U of R, and we just started talking. And the next thing I knew, I was interviewing, and I walked into our medical school on the interview. I literally interviewed in jeans. I was not prepared for it.
Oh my gosh.
And I legitimately was just like, what is this place? Like, why are they doing what I've always wanted to do? And how come I didn't know? And it just we just resonated, this institution and my values. And I said to my husband when we moved back, we'd be crazy not to take it. And we moved out here 13 years ago.
Wow.
With a fleece and a pair of sweatpants ready for winter.
Yeah. Because that's what you need.
Right. Because that's all I needed. I thought I had some cold days in San Francisco. But man, it was a tough transitional year.
Yeah. But the silver lining is you were able to now get a whole new winter wardrobe.
Multiple winter wardrobes. And winter is not just one season. There are multiple microclimates within it. But once I realized, Christian, honestly, that cotton kills you and you can't navigate winter with a fleece and a scarf, and you need more than just ankle boots. Like once I recognized that winter was a thing and you need to gear up, just like I needed to gear up for a trauma activation, or I need to gear up for a really bad nosebleed on Coumadin.
Yeah.
Once I realized like there was stuff out there to support me, number one, and number two, I couldn't hide from winter. I had to make winter something that I looked forward to in whatever way. And this happens across, the Midwest and the Northeast.
Yeah. It's weather.
You just have to just embrace it. And then it became fun.
Right.
And I love it now. I absolutely love it, which is really surprising to me.
Yeah, do you have family back in California?
All my family is in California and LA. So we get out there. But now, man, I get to like some of these really big cities and I think, wow, this is a different world.
Yeah. How your life changes. Like, I don't think I can do this.
It's really interesting how much I see it in such a different lens now. And I'm sure if I moved back to California, I'd have a different lens again.
Right.
It's just really, it's not for me now. That's what I can say.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Surprising. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's dive into Rochester.
Yeah.
The medical school. And I've been doing some homework on your beautiful website. And
which you helped me with, Christian.
No. Yours is spectacular. And I've kind of familiarized myself but I want to kind of go into walk us through this. The curriculum is called the Double Helix curriculum. Yeah. So if you could kind of give us, what are some of the curricular highlights of those first 2 years or maybe just start with the first year, like when you get a new medical student, what do they experience in the Double Helix curriculum that you like to tell people about?
Sure. So, before I even answer that question, I just really need to step it back one step before and really say that our institution, which informs the curriculum, is based on the biopsychosocial model, which is something that we hear all the time about here in Rochester, because the model was born here in Rochester by Engel and Romano in the 1950s.
I wanted to ask you about that because that's several places in your literature, and I want to tell us more about this. Like, what is it?
Right. So it is essentially the fact that race, age, gender, socioeconomics, faith, family, community, culture, nutrition, you name it, all of that profoundly affects who you are as a person and consequently your health. That's what the biopsychosocial model is that we are not physiology presenting as a chief complaint. We are a culmination of our environment, our genetics, and our community. And that's what informs our medical wellness or illness, right?
Yeah.
So the Double Helix is based on the foundations that if we don't pay attention to all of that, we lose key and critical parts of information that helps us take care of patients. So the Double Helix is kind of the thing that William Osler said, that medicine is an art informed by science, and that we have to appreciate the human being in its cultural context, in addition to have a profound understanding of science. So art and science intertwined looping around just like a double helix strand, with the patient at the center forming the bonds between each of those strands. That's kind of the metaphorical description of the helix model.
Oh, that makes sense. That's very cool.
Yeah. And so, but what does that mean in real life? It means that you are never, ever, ever going to learn about science in isolation away from the human being. And you will never learn about the human being away from the science. So that science and humanities are interwoven throughout your 4 years. So that means when you're learning about physiology, you're learning it in the context of an actual chief complaint, a human being's clinical course, and understanding the person in front of you through either simulated patients or standardized patients or your actual practice of medicine, because we get to the clinical clerkships very early at Rochester. And when you are in your predominantly clinical years, you are always brought back to the science of what you're doing through intersessions or through basic science modules and blocks or through your clinical practice itself. So that's really the foundation of the double helix. And I'm really excited. This year we have a curriculum overhaul. And we added, starting this year, Meliora in medicine, which is really the liberal arts, the focus on the humanity in medicine, having 3 significant pillars associated with them, which is all available on our website.
Yep.
But really about the transformation of a human being as a student into a provider that can take care of patients in an authentic and responsible and reliable way. So that pillar is going to go throughout all 4 years of our curriculum, and it's called Meliora in medicine. And Meliora is the moniker of the University of Rochester, meaning ever better. So that's kind of the double helix with Meliora in medicine as being the core practice of our curriculum.
How often are students in the first 2 years? I wrote down that there's very much a hybrid curriculum was what I've seen written about Rochester. And what does that mean?
But what that means is that you're never always in a classroom. Greater than 50% of our curriculum is taught in small group and team-based learning. And your clinical clerkships start at the beginning of your second year. We used to start it even earlier, but we took that away a little bit because we found students weren't 100% ready in the foundational skills of history taking and physical exam. And we really want to make that high impact because you're taking care of patients.
Right.
So we have small groups, we have team-based groups. And when I talk about team-based groups, I'm talking about not just having medical students in your group, but nurses, techs, pharmacists, and et cetera, helping you learn, like simulating the real environment. And then
very interprofessional.
Very, very
TBL.
Interprofessional. Yeah. And then obviously some big classroom settings where you learn in, traditional didactic format. And then always the clinical clerkships, which happen during your predominantly in your 3rd and 4th year. We have a really strong bend towards elective time. We have more elective time than almost any other medical school in the country. And we really, really believe that if you are naturally curious and inspired, you will learn in a much more impressive and robust way. So we have some guidelines on that elective time, but we really want students to find their home, find their interests, and develop it, because we really feel like medical school is a foundation or the entry ticket maybe to the game. And the game gets played when you kind of choose your specialty. So we want people to be prepared for that.
So students in the first 2 years, when does school begin in the morning? Like when does that elective time kind of kick in? Is it
that's so complicated.
Okay.
Yeah, it's variable. It depends on the day. There are days when there's no school. There's days that school start at 8:00 in the morning.
Okay.
But I would say, like any other medical school, we have a robust 40-hour week of educational activities, and, pick your educational activity from curriculum to, from classroom to small group to standardized patients to whatever it is.
When the students are doing their small group learning, this is the case-based stuff or the problem-based learning, right?
Yeah.
Are they with their same teammates for a duration of time, or are they mixed up every week?
No, definitely not mixed up every week based on the case itself. So some cases can be one session long. Some cases can be 14. You get assigned every single new session, a new group of people that you're working with. Our problem-based learning, which is really, really set through one of our big courses, which is called Human Structure and Function, keeps you in the same group because you form a dynamic. That's really important. And there's a lot of self-teaching, and you kind of need to learn each other. And that's probably the longest time that they're together. And that's over the course of one large block, which can be about 3 months. But other than that, we have a ton of other problem-based learning and team-based learning cases, and they can be anywhere between 1 and 5 sessions.
Okay. And in those PBL sessions, is there a faculty member or some kind of facilitator that's kind of helping shepherd them through this?
Yeah, but really the key word that you use is shepherd, right? So if you think about the traditional shepherd, they kind of walk alongside the flock, and there's, sheep going everywhere, and they're trying to get them through to the finish line. But how they get there is never the same per group. The shepherd is accountable for the learning objectives, but definitely not about how they get to those learning objectives. And that's the joy in a curriculum that is problem-based learning oriented, is that everyone gets to the same point, but they do it in a way that the group achieves their own internal goals and objectives.
And I think that's what undergraduate students coming into medical school need to understand, that it's not always formulaic in that, okay, here's a syllabus and today you're going to knock all this out. Or I think that they need to understand coming into medical school that for some institutions have this kind of self-directed, it's a little bit, it's not, you navigate it on your own as a team. It's not going to be always like in a pretty little box. Does that make sense?
Well, here's the deal. When I work in the emergency department, Christian, let's say a patient comes in who had a terrible car accident, and they come in and it's not clear to me what's wrong with them because maybe they're altered, or they have substances on board, or they have such traumatic injuries that they can't speak. It is my job to figure out with the team members around me how I'm going to approach that patient. There is zero formula besides key principles involved with that. I've got to make sure they're breathing. Yep. I've got to make sure they're not hemorrhaging blood. And I've got to make sure that I'm taking care of their main organs, brain, heart, etc. And those are the only rules, right? That's it. And that's what learning is about in medical school. We kind of have to unlearn how many of our students have been taught to learn.
Yes.
In medical school, because we're not teaching you, nobody hands you a book of microbiology and say all your patient's illnesses come out of chapter 12, right?
Yeah.
It would be so awesome if they did, but you really have to put on your detective hat and your communication hat and try to figure out what's wrong with that patient. And so we need to teach students to be comfortable in uncertainty and to be self-directors.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do because people feel insecure when that happens. Right?
Yep. I agree.
And, our educational system does not lend you to the skills sometimes needed in medical school. Like, man, these kids can take a test and these kids can put hours in.
Right.
But to be freeform is very uncomfortable to people.
Yeah. For some people, ambiguity,
It's devastating.
It's devastating. How do you deal with ambiguity? That's one thing I think students coming into medical school need to think about. Like, how do you deal with, because someday, as you can speak to this, that some days they won't go exactly as planned.
Right.
Well, especially in the emergency department, you don't know what's coming in.
Right.
For somebody in a clinic who has a day of, patients racked up, it doesn't always go as planned.
Absolutely. And how people present are the exact same presentation looks completely different. And it is really about pattern recognition and self-directed learning. Because I will tell you, about 40% of the time I see patients, I look at them and think, gosh, I have no idea what's wrong with them, but here's what I know what to do to get me out of this discomfort. And medical student, that is a big adjustment for a lot of medical students. And thank goodness medical school's 4 years and not, 6 months, because they learn that process through the course of their experience. But it's very unnerving to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yep. Well, there's a learning curve there for incoming students just to kind of start to get comfortable with that environment. And for some, it takes a little longer than others, I think.
And learning to learn is something that a lot of students don't think about. But how one learns without concrete endpoints or bookends, the semester beginning and the semester ending, is really a thoughtful discussion that people should have internally and with their colleagues and friends as they're applying to medical school. Because people who like it all nicely tied up and ribbon wrapped and, bookends on it can be a real adjustment.
Yep. If you're always trying to just get to the next endpoint, get to the next goal, and not kind of enjoy and appreciate the journey over the course of 4 years, I think that can be... Sometimes when I hear applicants or even prospective applicants asking me about board scores.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, whoa, you gotta you're a little tightly wound. Like, let's get there first.
And, I feel bad for these kids, right? Because our system has created these milestones that are so big in proportion to what really matters in the end. I was there, right? Like that's what I was thinking about for 2 years, but really, I wish I was thinking about, the genetic mechanism behind diabetes, because that may have allowed me to do research that was really informative and change populations, right? Or whatever it is. That sounds kind of grandiose, but we have created a system where, students are rewarded for thinking of those big steps, but they're far greater in their minds than they are in living your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Back to that whole value system of what matters is getting along with your colleagues, doing the best for your patients, and making sure that you're contributing to a community that you're really interested in serving in a responsible way. Those are the big things that matter.
Yeah, those are 3 awesome talking points right there you just mentioned. I mean, that really captures everything. But that everybody asks us, this is a popular question that we get when we're out on the road, or even on interview days, is, so how do students prepare for boards at Rochester? Is there designated time to study carved out in the curriculum to study for boards? I mean, I have to ask.
Yeah, no, it's definitely part of what we do, because we recognize that if you just ignore the anxiety, it doesn't go away.
Yes.
So what we need to do is give them platforms in which to work on it. So all of our classes have board-related studying involved, which is, I think, the right way to do it, right? If
you're not teaching to the boards, but you're also you're acknowledging that it is out there.
It's out there and it's important, and we want to decrease their anxiety. So every single course that we have in the first couple of years, the first 18 months of medical school, have board-related activities directly geared to them. We also give our students up to 6 weeks to study for the boards, free from class material. And then there are board review sessions in our medical school to help students, because I think one of the devastating things, Christian, is the mystery around the boards or the mystery around any of these big tests, right? Yeah. It is so much better to come in and be like, I don't care what your friends are saying who have not taken the boards. I have, and this is what you actually need to know. I think it can just relax people down a little bit. So much like drama gets created around the mystery. It's kind of like Game of Thrones right now. Like we don't know what's going to happen. So there's all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories going on. Let's just watch the series and we'll figure out what's happening. Yeah. We don't need to predict this.
I will sometimes student or prospective students will ask me, is 6 weeks enough? Because we have 6 weeks carved out because some other schools have 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And at some point you get saturated. And I think going back to what you said, exactly. It's the unknown. Well, if somebody's giving 8, why aren't you giving 8? Why isn't the others? What do they do? What do they know that the other schools don't know? And I can see why it creates some angst amongst.
What we tell our students is, it's like diffusions of gas, from the physics principle. The bigger the box, the more the gas is going to spread. If I give you 8 weeks, you're going to lose 8 weeks of your life studying for a test that you really don't need 8 weeks to study for. Because, we're screening for people who are able to take tests in a reasonable way at our medical school, right? We know you can take them.
These are high-achieving students.
These are high-achieving students. They can take the test. If we give them 8 weeks, they'll take 8 weeks. If I give them 14 weeks, they take 14 weeks. But at some point, in a very patriarchal way, I need to say, we need you to do other things that actually will influence your life in a significant way, like exercise and connect with people or prepare for a clinical clerkship that may influence the rest of your life.
Exactly.
So, up to 6 weeks seems reasonable. If you need more than that, maybe you need time out because maybe you didn't master the information in the first 2 years. And that is a legitimate thing. And on individual cases, the school will take a look at that. But in general, most students, and we have an excellent track record with a, 98, 99% pass rate.
I saw that. Yeah.
Right. Like we have historical precedents of what we're doing works, and most schools do.
Yeah. Trust the process.
Trust the process. Right. And we have variable learners and really different MCAT scores coming into this, which are the predictors of the USMLE. So it's going to be fine, right?
So when students get to the 3rd and 4th year, how are those years generally structured, particularly the third year? So they're out in their clinical rotations in their third year. What hospitals in Rochester are they doing these rotations? How do they pick? Do they pick them? Are they assigned to where they go?
Yeah, it's a giant computer in the sky figures all this out based on preferences. And that's the most technical answer I can give you. Mm-hmm. But essentially what happens are students select their schedule based on priorities. Maybe surgery wants to go first because you're not going into surgery, mm-hmm. or maybe medicine goes first because you're not going to go into medicine. And for those people who don't know, it's a roll of the dice. And all of our students are prepared for their first rotation. That's just what we do. This is what we get through. And then we have 4 or 5 different sites that students can work in. We have our main mothership, which is Strong Memorial Medical Center, a Strong hospital at the University of Rochester, which is a massive institution. We have over 1,000 beds. Our ED sees 115,000 patients. We have 750,000 outpatient visits. And we are the quaternary medical center for the area, right? And by quaternary, I mean we get referrals for pediatric hearts from Syracuse and Buffalo and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So we have every single service, et cetera. So it's a busy tertiary. Is that
where you work?
Yeah.
For the emergency department. Okay.
Yeah. So we get it all. We get helicopters all day long of people coming in. And these are sick patients.
Yeah.
So we also have a sister hospital called Highland Hospital, and that is our community affiliate, which is getting busier and busier. It has a larger geriatric population. It looks like what most community hospitals around the country look like. Okay. Smaller volumes, much more intimate feeling within the hospital, but still a robust, busy hospital with lots of services. Not every service is there. They don't have a cath lab open. They don't have a stroke center open, but we're about a mile away.
Okay.
And then we have a number of different institutions affiliated with us that are both in the rural and community outreaches, and a bunch of community centers that are also an important part of how medicine is practiced.
Right.
And that's something that's really important because not everyone wants to work in a hospital setting. So we have outpatient clinics that are freestanding. We have freestanding emergency departments. We have rural hospitals that are resourced poor and specialty poor. And students will go to all of these different sites depending on where their needs are.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
In the third or fourth year, is there opportunities for research? You've mentioned research before. Is there opportunities for medical students to do research at Rochester? Is there dedicated time, or is it they do this kind of on the side? Yeah.
So not only is there opportunity, there is intense encouragement for people to be curious. You know, I don't like using the word research because there's this image of like a pipette and a small fluid and a vent and a hood, and it looks really particular. Mm-hmm. Research for me is completely about satisfying that needed element in a student of curiosity, of there is a deficit of knowledge, and how do I answer that question? And it could be at the bench. Mm-hmm. It could be in the community. It could be in the clinical arena. It could be in a million different, it could be on a database. It doesn't matter. Right. But we want our students to be curious, and we want them to be able to answer their curiosity. And so we have a very, very intense research or academic curiosity area, I don't know how to best describe it, that our students are exposed to at the beginning of their first year, and it goes all the way through to their fourth year. Cool. Culminating with a process of discovery where each student has to answer a question, and they're grouped together in a team.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that's a really nice curriculum. And when I talk about the double helix, about the art and the science, that is the science continuously coming through. And research has been as interesting as international research. Like, we're going to discover what it looks like to breastfeed in Malawi with global climate changes, and what it looks like now. Or it can look like finding a new dendrite in the nervous system. Or it can look like how do we deliver more formula to women who can't breastfeed in our local communities, whatever. Yeah. Yep. And so all of that is done through a pretty robust curriculum that is encouraged. Now, if you decide you're going to do your own project outside of that, which a majority of our students end up doing, you find a mentor and you work with that mentor. And there's lots of funding available between your first year and second year. Okay. And if you decide you want
to do a summer research, and then
exactly.
Could that continue on then?
Absolutely. Okay. And a lot of our students will do that. And then we also have available the academic research track, which is a fully funded year out for our students who have applied and met the requirements for a funded year out to do research in a number of different areas. And that really is a much more intensive year. To do real research, Christian, and you know this from your institution as well, you really need time.
Right.
And the curriculum in general, trying to teach you how to be a physician and a researcher is a complex tool. So we really want our students to, if they're going to go in, to do it well. So we'll pay for a year for them to do that.
Yeah. So you can turn it into a 5-year program if you want to.
You can turn it into a 5-year program, but every student will have some experience in answering a question.
Yep.
And that's real important for us.
2 things that you mentioned in the last couple minutes is community service and global health. And from what I gather, Rochester has a strong commitment to the community. I saw a lot of the student run clinics and the outreach that they do. But I also wanted to ask if you can kind of explain a little bit more what that looks like. And then people always ask us, what are the global health opportunities for medical students at your institution? So if you could explain both of those.
Sure. So our community service, for lack of a better term, or community engagement, is the reason I came to Rochester. I had never felt connected to the community around me, i.e. literally the geographic boundaries around me. I felt connected to my patients. I felt connected to my community within the medical center, but I never felt like the community needed me and I needed the community. And I came to Rochester and I realized that this is a hospital that is primarily dedicated to changing the lives of the people in the community surrounding us. And we have other aspirations, but that is one of the most profound missions of this institution. Rochester is, about 2 million people big. And if this institution went away, it would devastate our community. And if our community went away, it would devastate our institution. Right. But we're so integral to each other. And so if there is a project that's happening in the community that Rochester is not involved with, U of R is not involved with, I'd be shocked, and vice versa. And I wanted that relevance. I wanted that connection. I wanted to feel like there was a ripple, that if something happened here, you could see what occurred as the outcome out in the community. And I really am really passionate about, we can come in and do our job, but if we don't do it for the betterment of the people around us, and by that I mean the community surrounding us, I think it doesn't feel authentic to me.
Right.
I mean, I want to be needed and they need to be needed, right? And I think that partnership is really important.
It's a great opportunity for the students.
Yeah. And so every one of our students who gets screened or interviewed to come here is really queried about that. Like, what are they doing? Are they coming into being a hero? Or are they coming in because they desperately want to make a difference in people's lives? And it can be a virtual community, like some rare disease community, or it can be, a refugee population locally. It doesn't matter, but we want to see that people are interested in changing the lives of communities around them. And whether that's on small one-on-one interaction or on a larger political or advocacy level or on a massive level with like big data, it doesn't matter. We just want to see that people are interested in doing that. So that's kind of we have a whole office dedicated to community engagement.
That's awesome.
We had, up until this year, a community requirement. We found that we didn't need to do the requirement because
they're doing it anyway, right?
Anyway, so we one less requirement is probably better for our students. Finally, people take years out. We have the academic research track. We also have a year out where people can work in community and engage actively.
Oh, that's tremendous.
Yeah. So that's one thing. So, you take the word community and you expand it out and it becomes global health or, global engagement. It's the same thing, but on a bigger scale.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know this, but Rochester is a very strong microbiology and immunology research core. In addition to many other research cores, but it is a very prominent one. And we invent a lot of vaccines here. And so vaccines are these really neat ways to have real focus areas of global health interests, right? So malaria vaccine, HIV vaccines, all these vaccines that really are needed in Africa.
Very cool.
That's something that we really have connections to. So the ironic reason that we moved to Rochester, which was the first hook, was that my husband was recruited to lead the global health initiative for a center. And he's a global health researcher. And so Rochester has he printed out all the global health work that was being done 13 years ago. And it was 300 faculty members were doing global health work in our medical center, which is an enormous number of people. So the resources and the infrastructure is there. My only requirement is that people don't want to do something in a State Department warning area. Because he can't get you. But if you have a desire to work in a global capacity, Rochester will get you there. We just received a wonderful grant from the Levitan Foundation, funding people to do year-out initiatives in a global health capacity if interested. And we have tons of summer scholarships for people who are interested in global health summer experiences. And your year-out, your academic research track can also have a global experience if you wanted to do head injuries in Malawi. It's just a recent one, or EMS systems in Ghana. I was
just going to ask, are there particular places where Rochester students tend to you guys have relationships in particular countries or locations that Rochester students are kind of funneled to, but they do have the opportunity to kind of explore on their own?
Absolutely. We have a medical school affiliation, but it is not a working in a global health experience with Poland and China. So those are two places that we exchange, but we have affiliations with institutions all over the world. Like there's too numerous to count. So almost on every single continent. I don't think we have anything in Antarctica, but Africa, Central America, Europe, Asia, you name it, we have a place that we could get you to. So we have an entire office dedicated in the medical school to community engagement and global health initiatives.
So they can help students kind of meet with them. It's kind of the warehouse or the clearinghouse for these opportunities. The students can go there and kind of find.
They can totally do that. But more importantly, that office is talking about realistic expectations. I love the enthusiasm of students, but you're not going to figure out the cure for tuberculosis in a summer project. It's unlikely to happen. So we try to set expectations because it allows for a more satisfactory experience.
Yep. I completely agree with that setting, because I see that a lot of undergraduate students are going abroad as undergraduate students. That's like all the schools now are trying to keep up with the Joneses. Like, where can we send our undergrads? And when they come to medical school, they naturally have this question like, can I go abroad as a medical student? And I think it's a little bit different level as a medical student. If you're going to be doing outreach, sometimes it's the language barrier.
Yeah.
That could just be, that could really limit your experience. If we're sending you to some rural village in China, you might need to know a little bit of Cantonese to feel like you're making an impact there versus just going on a vacation kind of experience.
Well, and also that understanding of humility, right? You're not going in. If you can't do surgery here because you're not qualified, you can't do it there, right? These are not experiential models, right? These are human beings. And sometimes the enthusiasm of medical students need to be tempered with the reality of ethics and morals and humility. It's all motivated by good, but sometimes it can get a little over the top.
To talk about, just to kind of start to wrap up the curricular piece, I wanted to ask you, is there something in particular that we're talking about students at Rochester getting involved in service and global health opportunities? Is there something they all kind of get involved in inside the school, outside the school, that is kind of fun and that you hear that students are doing there?
We have some really interesting work that our students have really gotten behind in our student-run healthcare clinics. We have 5, which is pretty amazing. And they usually work with certain groups. And since we have a very large Hispanic immigrant population, especially after the hurricanes down in Puerto Rico, we have a really large immigration population there. We have refugee healthcare clinics, and we have clinics for those who are underinsured or not insured. And, being underinsured versus not insured is a real distinction and a limitation. And then our last one is we have a very robust, and just I'm so impressed with what the students have done, homeless clinic, which is a backpack clinic and a homeless outreach van that the students devised, created, put the real sweat and tears in instituting a really amazing homeless outreach program that is amazing, that the students completely run, staff,
there's a great video
fulfill.
on your website of that. I would recommend people go watch it because it does discuss the van, and I saw the backpack outreach to homeless people out in the community. It looked like a great, well-run program. And so that's all
it just really goes to show you what people can do at any institution, not just Rochester, with support and motivation, right? Like, it blew my mind. I was part of one of the first conversations of that homeless clinic, and I kind of looked at the student. I was just like, "You're crazy. No way. We're not letting medical students put backpacks on and go take care of homeless people under bridges in the middle of winter. Like, no, like your parents are going to kill us." Right. And just perseverance. And they have created this amazing project that changes the lives of the community around us.
And it gets back to what you were saying earlier was that your students, you're looking for students that want to be involved in your community. I see from what I could tell from the makeup of your classes, they come from all over the country. I mean, these are not just all kids from New York or from New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, they're coming from all over the place. So it's very clear that you're trying to get these students you're trying to identify students that want to become a part of the community
and who want to have questions answered, right? We want people who feel like it is their job not just to be a doctor, that's the easy part, but to make changes and to be leaders in that change, whether it is through small local movements or larger institutional movements or system-wide movements. That's what we're really looking for. And that may involve research or answering questions, that may involve advocacy, or that may involve engagement in organizations and communities around. That's kind of what we're looking for. It's hard to say that there's one typical Rochester student, but all of them have some part of that to them.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap this up, is there something that you wish people knew about Rochester, the medical school, that can't be found on a well-groomed website or in a fancy brochure?
Yeah.
It's intangible that you're like, oh, when you're talking to people, like this is something you want to mention to them. Like, you're not going to find this online. You're not going to find this in a brochure, but Rochester is this.
Well, Rochester is committed. The biopsychosocial model is not just about a student learning about their patients. It is also about how we view our students. And that commitment to the student is there not for 4 years, but I say this all the time, but for 40 years. The mentorship model, because of our size and our ability to understand who our students are as individuals, is so profound. And so connected. And we are really, really not interested in only taking care of you for 4 years. We're interested in making sure that this is a career for the next 40 years.
Yeah, that's solid.
And that's really what we wanted, because, Christian, 4 years is just a blink of an eye. It is really just the first step in who you transform into as a physician 10, 15, and 20 years down the line. And we want to be part of that. We're not interested in just a hello, come in for 4 years and I can wear the sweatshirt, at the reunion 20 years later. That would be failure for us, I think. We really want to be part of people's lives and the transformation that they personally have.
Yeah. So I think we've kind of God, this is really great stuff. And it has me pumped up. I think it has other people pumped up. So let's like the next kind of chapter here is like, so now you have people that are kind of clinging to your words now. So how do people get in? Like, how do people get into your school? And this is I know this is not an easy question to answer, but it's kind of a setup that, so when people apply to Rochester, what kind of, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier when you said something about service, but are there experiences or things that screeners are looking for that your institution really values that you're kind of looking for in a prospective student?
Yeah. Christian, Gus, that's the hardest question in the world to answer.
I had to ask. We get it all the time.
I know. And so, but let me give you some things to put some toeholds in. So first of all, you have to be competent, right? There is absolutely, we're just going to take that off the table. And I think every medical school applicant knows this, that you have to be qualified to do the work, because this is not easy work, right? I mean, you're taking 5 science classes within one block, right? That's not easy to do in addition to living your life. So there's a competency issue. And then there is just the ability to take a standardized test, because sadly, until the medical system changes, we're going to have to make sure that students can take a test. Now, I am not defining what that is, but you have to be able to take that test. So, and the test before you. All right. So we'll put that away. So competency and test taking.
We're all looking for that.
We all need that.
We're all looking for that.
So what's I liken medical schools to be like chicken breast. Every one of us has chicken. And the question is, what kind of sauce do you want on it? So the sauce that we are looking for is a student who really wants to be an agent of change in an ever expanding field of medicine where we don't really have a target point, right? So we're looking for people who have shown to us that they have the resilience, the curiosity, and the humility to be part of this really dynamic field. And so that can look like being a leader in an organization that they're powerfully attached to. Great examples are violence against women. We saw an applicant this year who had really been very quiet in her participation, but powerful in the impact that she had made.
Oh, cool.
The other, people who don't participate in research, but engage in research, right? Who say, like, when I asked the question, and I asked this to so many students who do research, if I gave you $1 million in 2 years or 3 years of free time, what question would you answer in your current research career? And it's always amazing to me how many students have never been asked the question of, what are you interested in studying? How
because
would
for
you?
A lot of times they've been kind of tagging along somebody else's research projects. Because, as an undergrad, you don't have access to start your own lab. But to your question,
is where are you out of the box on that? Like, where do you say, okay, I understand that I'm in charge of, slicing this gene, but if I had $1 million, I would slice it this way. Like, those are students who really challenge us to change medicine. And then, I say, I've used this word frequently, but cultural humility, right? Patients don't look like you. They don't act like you, and they don't make the same choices as you. So are you able to care for them with respect and dignity? And we need to see evidence of that regardless of who you are. Right. So are you able to work in a variety of settings with a variety of different people and be not the judger, but the care provider?
Yeah. To go back, you mentioned something just a minute ago about the student who was very much involved in violence against women. And you had mentioned the leadership prior to that. And I sometimes don't want students to think like you have to become the tagline president or vice president of an organization to be designated a leader. You can be a quiet leader in the classroom. You can be an involved leader within the organization, and your passion about that will ooze out to us. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And when I talk about leadership, I am talking about making a difference. I'm not talking about a title.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so for me, that is what leadership is that you have been able to take something you're passionate with and create something that finds meaning for you and other people around you.
And I think this is what we try to get across to our applicants is in the AMCAS application, you're able to describe in your experiences that it's not just like Common App, you get like 2 sentences.
Right.
But in the med school application, they give you 750 characters at least. unless it's most meaningful, where you can go into this kind of self-reflection or evaluation of what you did in the organization or what you did with that particular experience, right?
Yeah. And so one of the things I think this is really important in terms of applicants is that they don't realize how two-dimensional their application can be if they're just checking boxes.
Bingo.
Right? Like how many files, like thousands and thousands of files, and they all can look the same when you're checking a box. But when you have an authentic connection to something that you're doing, it comes across. It like screamed. It's like it becomes all of a sudden like a 4D printer or a 3D printer. Yeah. Like it's just like it's totally different. And I think that's really important. People like, you know, the way our profiles read is like we have a little graph of what people do, and you see people all over the place, and it feels so frenetic. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep. Just it looks like you're kind of checking boxes.
It feels like you're checking boxes, but when you see people like that, they got something out of the experience and they gave something to the experience, it totally reads differently.
And this is where when we're out on the road and students ask us, so what are you looking for? Or what kind of experiences do you guys like to see? That's a really hard question for us to answer.
Because there is no answer.
Exactly.
There is absolutely no answer. Yep. Whatever it is that floats your boat, do it well and do it with passion.
Yeah.
That's it.
I see the shock on some people's face when I say, you live your life, do things that you're interested in. Like, wait, what?
Right.
Like,
right.
I'm trying to do everything to please you. I'm trying to do everything I can to get into your medical school. And they're blown away by that.
Right. Because again, our system has made it such that the outcome of the acceptance is the win. The win is doing the work. Yep. Right. The win is getting engaged in the community and the involvement that you get from it and how you feel and how you make people feel. That's the win. Right. Because we're trying to translate that to the rest of your career. Mm-hmm.
Would you agree that while we're talking right now that we're saying, do things you're interested in, find your passions, and it'll ooze out for us when you write it up in your application. But would you agree that if there is something that's required in an experience, it has to be some medically related experiences?
Well, we need you to know what it's like to work this field every single day, because there's a lot of downsides to this field, right? Like you wouldn't. I mean, even when they send you to space, they put you in these anti-gravity chambers so you know what it feels like. Because if you get terrible vertigo,
an awesome analogy,
and you vomit all the time, like that's not a good place for you to be for 3, days or months or years, whatever you're in, right? Like we want you to actually see what it's like, where you're going to train and what you're going to be in, because this is not an easy field. There are a lot of stoplights in this field. So let's make sure that all lights are green before you go, because it's a lot of money, it's a lot of time, and it's not just your time and your money, it's everybody around you.
Yeah.
So let's make sure you love this, and this is all there is, because there are easier ways to help people than just go through medical school. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Is there a certain amount of hours that you guys are looking for, or do you just try to pull together based on what the applicant's presenting to you? You can kind of go, I think they know what they're getting themselves into. Yeah,
there's no certain hours. We don't have any minimums. However, we definitely want to see people have a setting, an experience in a setting that mirrors what they're going to be in for the next 4 to 6 years, right? So it's great to do something in a community clinic that's super rural. If you have the opportunity, get into an academic medical center, because that's what you're going to be training in, and make sure that you like that.
Yeah,
there are people who can't do that. All the finances and space, just tell us that. I had to work to pay for my tuition. I couldn't do that. Let us know why, but hopefully you'll have some experience in the setting that you are going to be in for the next 4 years. And I'm not talking about location. I'm talking about like theme, like you're going to be in
environment. Yep. So we talked about the screening process and in a way of kind of what things you're looking for.
One other thing in our screening process, Christian, I really want to say, we really do look at distance traveled.
Absolutely.
And people, when you say distance traveled, it's kind of like the word research. You have this vision in your head. They think about socioeconomically disadvantaged coming into like these great schools and achieving and whatever. It can also be the opposite. Those with incredible privilege, understanding what somebody without privilege lives like, right? So the distance traveled has nothing to do with the initial start point. It has to do with the delta or where you land up. And that's really important to us.
Yeah. Yep. Any other comments about screening at Rochester?
No, screening's the worst though. Yeah. It's so hard.
It is so hard.
It is so hard because it breaks your heart to say no to somebody.
These decisions there are very rarely, I always say there's very rarely any slam dunks.
Oh, I know. Gosh, I wish there were a slam dunk. Even people who, by metrics, do not look competitive, there's always something unbelievably compelling about their application. Yep. It's really hard.
Yeah, I agree. I can't say any more about that. This is
the
tough.
Worst part of the year. Really?
So because we spend hours, days, nights on the couch at night looking at it. We all do. We're cramming it in when we can.
Yeah.
So
and it's that it's always going to land up with this sense of sadness that you're somebody who's been to a clinic every single Thursday night for 4 years and has worked that hard and shown you so much effort that you're going to say no to. It breaks your heart.
Yeah. Yep. So when somebody gets the invitation to come to interview at Rochester, let's kind of go through just a little bit about the interview day. I'm always curious, do you have a role in the interview day? Like when you,
are you
definitely there every day?
Every single day, except if I am sick or have a planned trip out. And I only miss 2 this day because it's really important to me. I mean, this is what I do, right? I am the Dean of Admissions. I want to meet them and it's an honor to meet them. And I love seeing them after evaluating their application.
Exactly.
That's the cherry on the cake. So I start off by welcoming each and every one of them. I talk to them a little bit about our philosophy and who we are. I give them a little bit of an understanding of kind of the different avenues that they could pursue here. And then our director of admissions, Pat Samuelson, who's been doing this for a long time, then comes over and does the important stuff, which is all the logistics of the day. Each applicant gets 2 interviews, and we do not have we have just standard interviews. Our interviewers are pulled from all over the institution. They can be an MD, a PhD, a nurse, a pharmacist. It really has a lot of variability, which really speaks to our desire for interprofessional education. And the interview usually lasts about 40 minutes. Our interviewers do not get any parts of their file except the secondary application, the interview essays that we send to people who've been invited for an interview. And it's very limited information.
So what does that entail?
They're just 2 questions that we ask an applicant, and then we ask them to list the top 4 things that they would like to talk about. We find out their name and the school that they come from and their major. There are 0 metrics that are given to the interviewer.
So then the interviewer has, the name where they went to undergrad, and then these 4 top things the applicant wants to talk about.
Yep. And then 2 250-word questions.
Short answer essays.
Yep. So very limited information because we're not asking the interviewer to evaluate them on any metrics whatsoever. We will have the admissions committee do that in a standardized way for fairness. And we want the student to express themselves as who they are. That's the most important thing for us.
Okay. So if an applicant had, say, a rough sophomore year academically for whatever reason, and they listed it, and they're one of the 4 things they want to talk about. I just want to talk about a little bit why I kind of hit a bumpy road my sophomore year. That could be a thing to talk about. And say,
you can talk about whatever you want to.
Okay.
Right. And the first thing I'm going to give away, our first interview question for 99% of our interviewees, it's going to be, tell me about yourself. That's it. Right. It's not, I'm not going to ask you about like the infrastructure of the healthcare system, or an EHR question. I'm going to ask you about who are you?
That's a hard question to answer. Do you expect that people are going to say, where would you like me to start?
I hear that all the time, but so many students are prepared for that question because anyone who is coming for a set of interviews should know that that is a question that will be asked in one shape or form. Mm-hmm. So I tell people, give yourself a 3-minute speech, write it out, mm-hmm. have different parts of your 3-minute speech available for you to access and tailor it to each interview setting, right? Maybe people want to hear about where you grew up. That's the first minute. Maybe people want to hear about the hardest thing you accomplished or the most difficult thing you've accomplished. Or maybe people want to hear about your research interests. Like, you should have a 3-minute speech broken up into 30 to 60 segments, 30 to 60 second, like small segments that mm-hmm. you can, pull out of your bag and showcase.
And that's all coming from preparing for interviews, doing your homework and being self-evaluative.
Right.
So how many, did I get 2 interviews?
They get 2 interviews.
Is the second interview with a medical student, or is it both? Like
Not necessarily. Okay. It depends on availability. We mm-hmm. like to have a medical student interview because it's remarkable how different applicants feel with a medical student versus a faculty member and what they will be comfortable revealing. Mm-hmm. And it's really the medical students who are so astute in and empathetic is the other thing that I love. Sometimes faculty members can be a little bit more distant from the hardship of applying. And that's something that's really important. We had an applicant who the one faculty member mentioned that the applicant kept yawning throughout the entire interview and really scored the person quite low because they seemed bored. Uh-huh. And that's a reasonable evaluation. And the medical student saw the same thing and asked why they were yawning. And it turned out the guy had worked his job and then took an overnight bus, which was delayed for 3 hours because of a snowstorm, and had to sit on the platform for 3 hours in the cold while the bus was whatever. And then finally got to Rochester, half an hour before the interview started. I mean, to me, that is a slam dunk of somebody who I want at the school, who didn't turn around and went home,
Would you say, I frequently tell people, like, if something comes up like that's extreme, don't be afraid to tell the admissions staff.
Yeah.
Say, hey, I just want you to know, I had a really rough night last night to get here. And I just want you to know that, or maybe follow up with an email after the interview day to your director or to you to say, thank you so much for the interview. I just want you to know, this is what was going on in the background.
Christian, that is such a generous thing to say. And I'm going to start including that because I just assume that people would, and maybe that's a bad assumption to make. But I think that's the right thing to say because that is 100% accurate.
I want people to know that we're humans too.
Right. I had a rough day getting here, right? Yeah,
we're pretty reasonable people. Yeah. And like, just like you said, like you were amazed at the lengths this guy could have turned around at any minute and said, forget it.
I'm out. Right.
I'll try to reschedule, or I don't even know if they'll but kept persisting to get to Rochester. This was so important to him. But we'd like to kind of know that stuff. I think that helps put context to the interview day for you, the applicant.
It certainly does. And any extenuating circumstances, one of the things that I always struggle with at the interview is when people are embarrassed to explain what happened. And when I say what happened, whatever happened. Because something happens, right? And if it's perfect, I get a little nervous.
Right. Life throws you curveballs.
Right. And let's hear about it. Mm-hmm. Because I think it adds to the richness of each person's individual experience. And we're looking for human beings in medicine because that's who can relate to other human beings.
Yep. Well,
so we had 2 interviews and then we have an ethical case that we bring.
Yeah, I saw that. Okay.
Yeah. So that to me, Christian, is really about team dynamic. I could really, most cases, care less about your answer unless it's like extreme. Mm-hmm. Extremely bad is what I mean by that. But the ethical case is really about how do you play in the sandbox? Like, so how do you
create a visualization? So all the interviewees that day are sitting in a room, like a conference room, around a table together, and you guys hand out this ethical case. Everybody gets their own copy to read it together?
That's exactly right. Yeah. We have all iPads. So the iPad is preloaded with a case of the day, and we break the groups. We don't want any more than about 6 people in a case.
Okay.
So we have a couple cases running at the same time, and it's just a discussion. And then we take notes truly on your interpersonal capabilities.
So there's an evaluator walking around, or are you
we're sitting in the case. No, we try not to have a discussion. I've never had a case go where nobody had anything to say except for one, and I felt like I had to get involved there. But the cases go, I'll give the same case every single day for 3 months, and really different approaches. Some people get up and use the whiteboard. Some people create a grid on how to answer the case. Some people have everybody read the prompt. Some people have nobody read the prompt. Like, it's really always interesting. And all we're looking for is, how do you work in a team?
Yeah.
With people that you know nothing about, because that's what we do all day long in real life.
Right. Yeah.
And that's it.
And so is there a scoring system to that, or is it just comments that you share maybe the admissions committee on their...
Exactly right. These are just qualitative comments about, and most of the time what we comment on is there's nothing to add to, because most people are well within the realm of totally reasonable, lovely. So nothing to add is a good statement. It is a neutral statement of they performed as they applied, right? As decent, hardworking, kind people.
Kind of within normal limits.
Within normal limits, WNL, exactly. And it's kind of the extremes are what we land up talking about.
Yeah. So that kind of takes us to admissions committee. Is there anything else you wanted to comment on the interview day that you want people to know? It's a full day, I take it. It starts at 8:00 in the morning.
It starts at the crack of dawn, 8:00. It's not really the crack of dawn. And it goes, depending on when your last interview is. We obviously have a lunch and a tour. And, the one thing that I tell students all the time, and I bet you say the same thing, is, man, this is your day to assess fit. So you should be asking a lot. It is as much an interview of us as we are interviewing you.
Absolutely.
And I don't think people understand that. Like, you're spending a lot of money and a lot of time at this place. Make sure that this is where you want to be. Look at the billboards. Check out the cafeteria. Do not feel obligated to sit in the admissions lounge and stare at us, right? We don't need you to do that. Get up, talk to housekeepers, talk to staff, I
am blown away sometimes. Like, you came here all the way from Washington, and there's no questions about
zero questions.
I'm just, and part of me, I feel like sometimes I'll even say it to them, like, you're like, look, we want to hear your questions today. You might just be thinking like, look, man, I just want to get into this place. I don't care about.
Right.
But I think that, you exactly what you said, you're interviewing us. We're expecting you're going to have questions for us. It stands out to us if you don't.
And what was amazing to me is, I want a curious person in my medical school. Right? I want people who are curious, because curiosity is how you learn. If you're not even curious about the school that you're interviewing at, that you just paid or the $1,000, like, we can talk about music, we can talk about food, we can talk about sanitations, in the city. I don't care what we talk about, but show me who you are through your questions.
Yep.
And, the vast majority of people are real timid about that. Which I think is a disappointment.
Yeah. And I will say, and you'll probably agree with me, sometimes this comes up in admissions committee discussions. They asked me a lot of questions about this, whether it was the hospital or whether it was about the food scene. I mean, they really seemed interested. It comes across, they really seemed interested to be here.
Right.
And that
is a huge bias towards yes.
Yeah.
We all want good yields, right? We want the people that we like. We want them to like us. It's a big, giant dating game. And the way it makes no sense. Even if you're uninterested, it should be a reflection of other schools that you are interested in. All right. So you don't have, I don't know, a 3D graphic anatomy display. Well, gosh, XYZ school does have it. That's really great. Right. So regardless of your interest in the school, after interviewing, there should still be questions involved.
Yeah.
And if it takes you the time to sit down and write out the questions, spend that time doing it.
Yep.
Prepare well. So preparing isn't about answering. It's also about asking.
I have a list of questions I ask people. Some people say, is it okay if I get out this notebook? I have some questions.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah,
and if I see somebody with a notebook, I'm relieved, because then there's not pressure on me to find out everything about them.
Yeah.
They're telling me who they are through what they're asking me. Mm-hmm. And I love when a student has a list of questions. And sometimes they're afraid to ask the same question to multiple interviewers, which is a mistake. I think ask the same question, the ones that most matter to you, because you'll get 15 different answers if you ask 15 people.
Yep. Oh, this is gold. So talking about admissions committee, is there something that you find that your admissions committee members get really excited about regarding a candidate, or in general, or do you find something people get really nervous about when there's a discussion about a candidate?
I'll be honest. I really love our admissions committee. They are such bright, interesting, and diverse people, not just racially and ethnically, but of thought. And that's really important. There's a very heterogeneous mix. And they pick up stuff that is absolutely fascinating. And what everybody gets excited about are people who are passionate about doing what they're going to do in an independent and autonomous manner that leads to outcome change. That's what people get excited about. Like, holy Toledo, look what this gal did, right? Or look at this project this person did, and look at the letters of recommendation that support that.
Yeah.
And it's not 15 projects. It's usually one project, right? Look how far this person came from where they started to where they ended. That's what people get excited about. I think I totally agree with you. And I don't want people to hear this and go like, all right, I've got to go find this project that's going to make clean water for 1 billion people. It is not about that.
It could be, I've had students, I have applicants, maybe you have two, like they worked at the university and they helped students who were disabled or had,
tutoring programs,
takers or something. Like,
absolutely.
They went to somebody's dorm room and helped them transfer in the morning.
Right. Or big sib, little sibs. They don't need to be unique projects. They just need to be authentic ones.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. We have one school has some type of clinic associated with them. We see a lot of students from that school working in the clinic. When you ask about somebody who's really authentically engaged in that clinic about what they've done, there are people like, oh, I set up the room and I put on new paper and I make sure the light bulbs are all fixed. And then you have people from that same exact clinic say, I worked with this patient client and we worked together to figure out how to sign up for the Affordable Care Act. And I didn't know, so I went home and researched it. It's the same patient with the same clinic. Yep. Right? That's the student we want.
Yep. So that's the type of project or something that you're talking about. It doesn't have to be this big time thing that you go out and invent. And it's the way that you participate in it and how you describe it.
Students who go through 4 years of college generally don't have time to do those big projects. Right. We recognize that. You're busy. You're busy learning about, I don't know, pottery in ancient Greece. I don't know, whatever you're doing. But that is something that is really profound to us.
If somebody's waitlisted at Rochester after the interview, and they're really interested in Rochester and coming there, how do they demonstrate that interest? Are you a school that accepts update letters or letters of intent or interest?
Christian, more, especially this year with the traffic rule changes and us having very little insight as to who's on our wait list in terms of their options, we really want to hear that. It would be, and for all the pre-healthcare advisors out there listening, make sure their students are reaching out to schools that they are viably interested in. It really makes a difference.
It does. Yep. So you collect that and kind of track it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yep. We collect all communications and we put it in their files. And when we're going through, especially as the time gets closer and closer to the start date, we're going to be looking at people who we know want to come because we don't want to waste our time with students who don't want to come.
Yeah. Would you agree that it's okay to be just out there? I don't need to have an entire 2-page update about all the things they've been doing. I want to know, are you still interested?
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
You have to make up insignificant ththings like, well, I walked a little lady across the street the other day, and then I got my books back to the library on time.
Yep.
I'm a good citizen.
100%. Use words that tell me that you want to come to my school.
Yeah.
I am enthusiastic and excited to matriculate at the University of Rochester.
Yep.
I am still eagerly anticipating an acceptance. Like,
So
I just
it could be 4 sentences. It could be 5 sentences.
I want to come to Rochester desperately.
Yeah. I'm your guy. I'll be there on the first day.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
And all my paperwork will be done.
Right. Okay.
That's what we want.
I think people need to hear that, though, because sometimes we get, like you probably do, that people say, can I have an additional letter of recommendation sent on my behalf? And fine if you want to do that. But, at this point, you're very well liked. We know that people are going to say glowing things about you. I want to know if you're going to come.
Well, that's another way, though, interestingly, Christian, that we hear from students that they want to come is I will have somebody from their medical school or their undergraduate institution send me a letter and say, Jane is not joking. Like, she really wants to come to Rochester. Yep. That is a big way. But I don't need to hear about more. We've already thought you were fantastic for a fit because we invited you. So
that's a good distinction.
Yeah. We know your fit is good. Tell me that you really want to come, whatever way you want to communicate it.
I've had, and you probably have too, had some advisors call and say, I'm making one phone call for Greg.
Yep. Absolutely. This is it.
He is, when he says he will, be there tomorrow, he will be there tomorrow.
He will be there tomorrow. Exactly right.
Okay. Just to kind of wrap up here before we do listener questions, Rochester, where do students live there? Is it affordable? Like, what do they do for fun in the city?
It is so affordable. It is actually, and I think probably Cleveland and Rochester have a similar vibe in its essence. One of the things I didn't get when I went to medical school out in more expensive areas was that funds are limited in a real way. And if you want some extra space, the only way to do that is either to get more money in your loans or spend less on things that are absolute necessities. So Rochester allows you to do that in a really great way. We're one of the most affordable cities in the country. We are definitely a 4-season. We have a whole white coat neighborhood, which we call where most of the medical students live. I'd probably say 70%. But we have a very robust downtown region that includes the Eastman School of Music, which is a premier music school, kind of like Juilliard, right? So students live down there. And then there's all these cultural hubs, the South Wedge, the Ninth Ward. And then we get people with families because Rochester has incredible public school. So we get people who live out in kind of the suburbs, Brighton and Pittsburgh. Nothing in Rochester is further than 20 minutes away from anything. You could be across town and someone will say 20 minutes.
So there's not traffic.
So there's zero traffic. Yeah. If I see a brake light, I am hysterical. And that is a blessing and a joy after being from California.
I bet.
Yeah.
So, what do you do for fun in Rochester? We already know that you like to entertain people in your home.
Right.
And you take your dog for a walk around.
Yeah, we have tons and tons of nature around us. So we have the Adirondacks a few hours away. We have the Finger Lakes, which are spectacularly beautiful. So I do a lot of sailing in the summertime. Oh, cool. Wow. I love creek walks. I don't know if you know what that is. No. So we have a lot of lakes and rivers and water around us. My dog loves water. So we find creeks and we walk up them alongside the salmon and the trout in nature, which is so much fun. Yeah, it's really spectacularly beautiful.
Never heard of that.
Oh, yeah. So we do a lot of creek walks. And in the fall, it is all about harvesting. So I love blueberry picking. We have a huge Amish and Mennonite community around us. So great farms. So I do a lot of like food and culinary stuff surrounding that, either by farm table dinners where farmers will put on entire meals out in their vineyards and their farms. And I pick a lot of berries and a lot of different fruits and can and, jelly stuff. And then in wintertime, and I have to tell you this, I love exercising outdoors in the winter. There is
like cross-country skiing?
Running, cross-country skiing, and ice hiking, which is really fun.
Ice hiking? Winter
hiking right through snow and ice. Oh. It is so
and this is coming from a woman from Los Angeles.
From LA, where it was between 70 and 80 for 90% of the year.
Yeah, you can adapt and have fun.
And not only can you adapt, you can thrive.
Yeah.
who knew I liked Four Seasons? I didn't know. I had no idea. Like, it's like I would go to California or someplace like California with a pretty limited climate and really miss what the seasonal change does for who I am. Mm-hmm. It really makes me diverse.
Oh, that's fantastic. Is there anything else? So we're about to wrap up, and then we're going to talk about gap years in our kind of a question section. Anything else that you kind of want to share about Rochester that we didn't? I try to kind of cherry pick a little bit from each kind of chapter.
I think what I really want to say about Rochester is that, and I hate to throw you under the bus with me, but, we get a bad rap because of our location and our winters and whatever. There is so much to do here.
Yeah.
Right. And there is so much need, and there is so much diversity, racially, ethnically. It's shocking. Yeah. And to be able to take care of all of that diversity under one roof where people aren't subdivided into 50 different medical centers is a gift. Yep. I don't think people recognize that the ability to see a gunshot wound victim next to a CEO or an immigrant from a refugee camp to somebody who's been here since, the Mayflower, it's just amazing. Yeah. I didn't recognize, because where I came from, everything was subdivided by community, right? So Hispanic patients went someplace and Asian patients went another place and transplants went another place. It all comes to one place. I mean, it's an amazing training ground. And I want people to recognize that.
I agree. You were exactly right. We deal with similar kinds of myths or misconceptions. And I kind of want to put it on our website some days. Like, we're pretty much the only game in town here.
Right. Like, don't be crazy. Like, don't share your dinner. Like, come to one place and eat it all, you know?
And I think that's something that's sometimes lost superficially on websites, or that we don't just come out and say it. Maybe we should just come out and say, we're pretty much the only game in town.
Right. And we're the only academic game in town.
Yep. And as a medical student, you're appreciate that.
Yes. Yep. You will benefit from that. And that's why I think students from your institution and our institution are so highly desired, because they are used to seeing all kinds of patients, right? It's not like you have to train them in cultural humility. Our students are culturally humble because they are taking care of all sorts of patients all the time.
All the time. Yep. That's
every day. Right. And you're changing like your face all day long as you go from room to room to room to try to accommodate them, you know?
Yep. We're going to talk about gap years. And these are a few questions that we've received that we want to try to answer. But I think these are a lot of common questions that you and I have both heard from time to time. So do you have one for me?
Yes, I actually do. Carolyn at Tufts University was wondering if you had suggestions for gap year activities that would benefit her as an applicant.
And you've gotten this question before, haven't you?
A million times.
A million times.
Every which way.
Yeah. And I always, when I'm speaking with somebody, I would say, well, it depends on your situation, right? If you're finishing your senior year of college and you decide you want to take a bridge year or a gap year or years, you want to decide, well, is there something that you didn't do as an undergrad, or something you have to kind of maybe shore up for your future application that you just didn't have time in undergrad to do a lot of shadowing because you were a varsity athlete, or you were, incredibly involved in some activity or activities that it's only so many hours in the day. So I think it's very individual.
I agree.
Academic.
And this is really where your pre-healthcare advisor should be working with you extensively, because you really have to consider why you're taking the gap year, right? Are you doing it for remediation because your grades weren't great? Are you doing it because you're deficient in a certain part of your application that you think is really important? Or are you doing it because you're not ready to settle down into the field of medicine? Or are you doing it because you have a significant other in a different area? Like, all these are legitimate reasons to take a gap year.
Absolutely.
So the one that benefits you the most is the one that most honestly addresses the issue that you're dealing with.
Yeah. I would like to tell people too, if you're looking at it, depending on what the reason is, if you're going to take a gap year to try and, quote, enhance your application, then don't apply right after the summer of your senior year. Because we're not going to see a whole lot of that. We're not going to see a whole lot of what you're doing that year in the application itself.
That makes so much sense. And we say gap year, which implies 12 months. A gap period, if you're, you may need more than a couple of years. That's all right.
Yeah.
The average age of medical students is between 23 and 24, which means people are taking gap years with a plural on that.
Yep. It's a much more common occurrence now recently that I've seen than it was years ago.
What % of your applicants do you see taking a gap year?
Over 50%.
Yeah, me too. It's so surprising.
Yep.
And
students
you know what?
doing all kinds of stuff.
And they're becoming more enriched applicants, right? Because all of a sudden, when you have real world experience, medicine isn't just a knowledge thing or this like wonderful, like altruistic profession. It's also a job.
Yeah.
So when medical schools see that people can do the job as well as learn and thrive in the environment, it really makes them a compelling applicant.
Yeah. And in an interview perspective, we have more to talk about.
Heck yeah.
I mean, you talked about the 4 things that the applicant gets to list. I have to think maybe 50% of, 2 of those 4 things might be what I've been doing the last year or 2 or 3 years.
Well, it's so interesting. I ran a combined 8-year program, and that was really the anti-gap year experience. And I always had this little feeling of like, what a shame. These people don't have the opportunity to take time out because they're going directly through.
Yeah.
And I started running a program and I said, you know what? I'm not going to let them do that. I want all of these kids to consider taking a year out before they come directly to medical school. Because the reality is, if you're going to do medicine, let's say the average age of 24 and you retire at the age of, 65, you have 40 good years to do medicine. Go do something else. It's okay.
If there's something that you want to do that you haven't done yet as an undergraduate, go do it.
Because
once you get on this med school train,
you're in it.
You're right. It doesn't stop, right?
It does not stop.
And it's hard to make those stops along the way to go then and take the year to go travel and do
it is so
things.
Difficult. Yep. And especially after medical school, once you start residency, man, the train does not have any stops.
Yeah.
Right. It just doesn't. And to take a year out of your career to do something is very, very difficult to do. Mm-hmm. The liberty comes before you start medical school and maybe a year in medical school.
So 40 years down the road,
man, you're going to wish.
And you think about that 1 or 2, the gap years maybe you had to take or the ones that you decided to take. It's like a blip. It's like, oh my gosh, I was so worried about it then. And it was like not the biggest deal in the world. And
you spend more time doing medicine than you do anything else in the rest of your life. So, really go out and do something that makes you really excited.
Yeah. How about, I have a question for you. This is Mike from Clemson. So he already has decided he's taking a gap year time after graduation. He didn't do a lot of research as an undergraduate student. He's hearing from people he needs to do research during his gap year. What do you think about that?
Well, it really depends if Mike is super interested in research. If he's super interested in research and really wants to know if that's a career for him, then I absolutely think he should be doing some research. But if he's doing it to check the box, and he really is compelled to feel like he has to do some research, then I would ask him, what type of research is research for you? Mm-hmm. Is it, finding a molecule that is otherwise undiscovered? Or is it by working in a community clinic, understanding, rates of cancer in a certain population? So be really careful that your research aligns with the stuff that you're interested in, because it can be a real turnoff to you for the career in the future if you do something you hate. And it can be really negative if you do something you don't like because you have to do it and you get a very lukewarm evaluation. Yeah. Do you think you're going to take a gap year? I want to see some type of evaluation from what you've done, or some type of product from what you've done. It doesn't have to be a thesis or anything, but what did you get out of it? And who's evaluating you for it? If Mike wants to say, but I want to apply to research intensive institutions. Sure. Like Case, like Rochester, like Duke, do I really need to have like some kind of research? I'm willing to do it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I would prefer them to have research because we're going to ask them to do some research in medical school here at Rochester. Is it an absolute? We have lots of students we've admitted who've never spent a day in a lab. But it makes sense in an academic institution. There's, the top 50 research institutions are going to want to see some type of curiosity, evidence of curiosity is what I would say.
Yeah.
And again, I use that term broadly.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, one for you. Lauren from University of Colorado Boulder. She applied to medical schools this year, and she was rejected by all the schools she applied to.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
So I know. What should she do this year? Should she reapply right now or do something for the year and then reapply next year?
Oh, that's a tough one. The real question is, why did she get rejected from every single school? So it really, this is where your pre-healthcare advisor needs to be brutally honest with you. And if you don't have a pre-healthcare advisor, I encourage people to find the school that they like the most and call their dean and say, would you mind looking at my application? I have no pre-healthcare advisor, and see if somebody will help you look at your application. Yeah. What should she do this year? Depending on if it was academic remediation, then she really needs to show that she can do her academics. Should she reapply? Not with the same application.
Agreed.
Not with the same. We need to see what happened and how you fixed it. And 50% of students, or 48, what I don't know exact number, don't get into medical school the first time. This is not the end of the world. Yeah. A significant number of our applicants are reapplicants. I'm okay with that. It is not the kiss of death.
Yep.
What do you tell people, Christian?
Very similar. I mean, if it's academic, you need to evaluate what do you need to do to kind of bolster those academics to show medical schools that you do have the chops to handle hard sciences, but not to apply when you're just registered for the classes. That doesn't count. To say, I'm registered for all these upper level science courses. What do you think now? Like you said, we want to see the product of that year. And so, and plus, if you're signing up for all these classes, those aren't free.
Yeah. And how do you take them and still apply at the same time?
So you're going to lay the money out to do this, whether it's a special master's or you're just cobbling together some courses at a university near you, then apply afterward to put that money to work and that time to work on your application. Because we can't take updates during the season in December and say, oh, I've done my first semester of coursework. I've gotten straight A's. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So what do you do? What do you tell people who want to take a gap year because they didn't get in anywhere, but really came from institutions that don't have robust pre-healthcare advising? How do you help them? Because the U of R students are so lucky. They have amazing pre-healthcare advising, right? And they have access to me as a complimentary, connection. What do you do? What do you tell students who come from significantly rural backgrounds, socioeconomically disadvantaged, so they didn't go to schools that maybe have a huge pre-healthcare committee?
So probably like you, we get a lot of email requests for this. And I think sometimes students, we're bare bones staff. And and we have a lot of things going on. And so I'd love to be able to accommodate every request. But if they indicate that they don't have this type of support from their institution, we try to at least do a phone call with them. Yeah. Or try to answer it via email. Just say, hey, okay, I get it. What are some of your, give me like 2 or 3 bulleted questions about your application or about what you want to do. And we'll see if we can answer it via email. Or if we want to, let's try to set up a phone call and either with myself or our assistant director and see if we can't handle it that way. But I guess a lot of it's the timing, it's the availability of our staff to do this kind of stuff, because it usually takes about a half an hour sometimes to go to really talk with somebody about a realistic conversation about where things need to be kind of tightened up.
I wonder if the AAMC has any online forums associated with it. I don't know the answer, but they have a lot of resources for applying to medical school. Yeah, I just started looking through them. I'd never really looked at it. They're amazing resources online at the AAMC if you don't have a good pre-healthcare advisor. Yeah. really helpful.
The NAAHP, that's the Advising Association, the Pre-Health Advising Association, they do have some advisors that volunteer to be available to students in the situation that you're describing. And their website, it's naahp.org. And it might be one of the drop-down menus that says something about like contact an advisor.
Yeah. And some of the affiliation groups like SNMA, Student National Medical Association, which is for Black students, LMSA, Latino Medical Students Association, and I believe PAW, which is the Native American affiliated group, all would be able to put you in touch with advisors in addition.
I think that's a good way to wrap things up.
All right, great.
Yeah, this has been fun. To kind of, put a bow on it, is kind of final thoughts, Flavia, is there anything that, like a recommendation you give to students, like a book? You said you like to read books.
Yeah.
Is there a book that you would tell people, hey, you should check this out? Like if you want to get away from the OChem book that you're reading and the physics stuff that you're reading right now.
Yeah, right. There are a couple books that I love and a podcast or two that I really like, a blog. So there's a book by Jerome Groopman called How Doctors Think, which I think is amazing. And I really loved reading that book.
That's a good one.
And then for the fun of things, The God of Small Things are beautiful. It's a beautiful book by Arundhati Roy, I just love that book. And An Unaccustomed Earth, which are short stories, these powerful cultural stories that were really wonderful. And there is a book called The Tennis Partner by Abraham Verghese, who also wrote Cutting for Stone. And that is an unbelievable story about mentorship, because it is mentorship that drives a successful career, because there are times that you are going to stumble and fall without a doubt. And it is your mentors and family and friends who will pick you up. It is absolutely 100% guaranteed that you will stumble and fall, and you need the right people around you. And I love The Tennis Partner and how this, unique mentorship experience occurred, and what it meant to both the mentor and the mentee. And I think that's really important for everyone to have. There are two podcasts that I really like, or blogs that I like. I think to be a good doctor, Christian, you need to be able to talk about things, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. You have to be wise, because people need to connect. Otherwise, AI will answer all of our questions. It'll be better than us, right? We need to be translators. So I love anything that tells me about current affairs, like daily. The New York Times is something I listen to every day. I try really hard to listen to something every day. It doesn't take that long. It's about 15 minutes. It's just a story that the New York Times picks, and it makes me a little bit smarter, because it is so easy to get down the rabbit holes of medicine. And you asked me some of the things that I like doing. One of my big side projects in medicine, which is not related to anything, is gender-related discrepancies. And I am very involved in women and gender-related issues, women's rights within medicine and the House of Medicine, and how bias has affected us. And there is an amazing blog called FemINEM, FEMINEM. It is one of the most powerful experiences I've ever been part of, and I'm only an observer. I don't have any financial stake in it at all. And it's free. It is a podcast and blog and conference about topics related to disparities in healthcare, primarily related to women.
Oh, that sounds cool.
I so support it. You don't have to be an emergency medicine doctor. There is so much wonderful stuff there.
All right. I'm going to put links to these suggestions on our website, so that listeners can, if they want to, check out one of these books, or sign up for these podcasts. It sounds really cool. So thank you for those suggestions, and thank you for being on the show, Flavia. I really
Christian,
this has been fun. You really rocked the mic.
You are fantastic. I literally think Terry Gross needs to be nervous. You're coming for her job.
I think Dr. Maida will be upset by that, so she won't let me leave. So,
all right.
Well, thank you, Flavia.
All right, Christian, take care.
Bye-bye. There you go. There's everything you need to know about the University of Rochester School of Medicine. I want to thank Dr. Nobay again for coming on the show. She gave us a lot of her time, and I think it was well worth it. We learned a ton of things about the institution, and hopefully we gave you a lot of really helpful tips along the way. Listen, if you enjoyed the program, I ask you to tell a friend, tell several friends, and subscribe to us on iTunes, and you can also find us on Spotify. And if you have questions, please email those questions to allaccess@case.edu. That's allaccess@case.edu. And hopefully we'll be able to answer your listener questions in a future episode. So until then, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.